Hello and welcome. I'm back with another episode of Sixth Sense CEO. If you don't know me yet, my name is Sam and I'm the host of this show. I really created this podcast because I'm a multi-passionate entrepreneur and I wanted to create a new channel for me to share my stories, express my perspectives on things, and overall just connect with other entrepreneurs and like-minded women. If you watched my previous episode, I did mention that this upcoming episode would be about how to go from surviving to thriving in business. So that's going to be the main topic of today's chat. So what I mean by this is, especially when you're first starting out in business, and let's say you're a solopreneur, you don't have a team to help you, even maybe you don't have contractors helping you with anything. You're doing absolutely everything yourself, from the business operations to the marketing to the accounting to the finance side of things. That can become very overwhelming, right? And when you're building your business from the ground up, it can feel like you are just scraping by, just struggling to survive, not really enjoying your business. And this is something that I think a lot of business coaches don't talk about from the get-go, because there's this period in the beginning that many entrepreneurs face where they're just seeing where the next check's going to come from, where the next client's going to come from, how they're going to continue to make ends meet in this initial period of just starting up your business. And that's something that I experienced. I'm only in my third year of running my content marketing agency, but I would say that years 2 and 3 have been the hardest for me, just because in the first year, it was kind of like the shiny new object. And I was thinking, oh, wow, this is amazing. I work for myself. I'm my own boss. Everything is wonderful. But then once you progress in your business and you start to face new challenges as you grow, it becomes very, very different. And you start to see that running a business isn't always rainbows and unicorns and butterflies. Sometimes there are really hard things you have to deal with, whether it's financial challenges or having to fire someone. Those are things that in my second and third year of business, I've had to deal with. And all of that can become very overwhelming and send you into a fight or flight response to these situations. And there have been times in my business where I have completely frozen up and just wanted to crawl into my bed and not come out for 3 days. You know what I mean? So really this topic of going from surviving to thriving has been on my mind lately, because I've gotten to a better place where I feel like I'm thriving more in my business. I'm in my zone of genius. I'm using my creativity. I'm doing the tasks that I want to do and delegating the things that I'm not a super big fan of. So today I'm going to share more of my story of starting my business and the first 3 years of business, lessons I learned along the way, challenges I faced, just so maybe if you're going through something similar, it can give you something to relate to. I've mentioned this before, but when I first started my business, I didn't have investors. I didn't have loans or really funding coming from anywhere. I had my family who was very supportive of me, and they let me live with them for a bit while I was still getting on my feet. But I didn't have support from investors or anybody externally. So a lot of startup companies, especially in the tech or innovation spaces, have investor funding. And all of a sudden, once they get this funding, they have all these resources to work with. They can buy the nicest technology. They can hire people to help them. That's a totally different world, but that's not the approach that I took when I first started my business. Whenever I first started out, I was essentially a freelancer, working for myself, taking on clients, using my skills to provide support to them and solve problems for them. So as I mentioned in the last episode, I didn't have any clients for the first 5 or 6 months that I had my business, because I was just, honestly, I was spending a lot of time doing things that weren't really helpful for client acquisition. I was spending hours designing social media posts, just trying to get every little detail perfect. And that's not really a good use of your time if you're working for yourself and you desperately need clients, right? But then once I had success on Upwork, it became very exciting for me. And I thought, wow, this is really happening. Things are moving forward. I can really do this. And that was amazing. But once again, that was kind of a shiny object because it was something I hadn't had before that was new and exciting. And I had this kind of perception of it that it was all going to be fine and dandy. There weren't going to be too many issues. Everything was great in the beginning. But then as I scaled up, there were way more challenges. So, issues with clients came up, issues with people I was working with came up. And by the way, this is not a criticism of anybody who's currently on my team because I have wonderful people supporting me now. I've really done a great job of finding the right people to work with me. And as a team, we worked really well together. So I don't mean that to sound like I'm the one who's completely driving everything because my team plays a huge role in the success of our clients today. But, as an owner of a company, as a CEO, as the leader in the company, sometimes you have challenges with people that it could be they don't have the right skill set, which maybe you thought that they did, but they actually don't. Or they're not doing their job, or you run into other challenges that you have to deal with. And when things happen that essentially break the trust between you and your team, that can send you into this feeling like you're in survival mode because all of a sudden you feel like you have to micromanage. You feel like you have to double check everything, and that's not productive as a leader, right? And I'm not saying this to play the blame game or say anything negative about the people I've worked with, but I'm just really sharing it from my perspective, what my experience was. And in some cases, I did have to do services. I had to manage client communication and do a lot of those tasks myself rather than relying on other people to do it. And there was a point in my business, I would say at about the 1.5 year mark, where I was stretched way too thin. I had so much going on. I couldn't focus on anything. And part of it was the situation that I was in and just having too many projects, too many different moving parts that I couldn't keep track of. But another part of it was entirely my fault. And that was because I wasn't really showing up as the leader that I needed to be in order to run that company. And I'll be the first to admit that I have not always been a good leader. There were times in my business where I got so caught up in other things that I wasn't available to answer questions or provide support to my team that they needed in order to complete their jobs effectively. And in those cases, they really got the short end of the stick because I wasn't being the leader that I needed to be. And although I am saying that there were mistakes made in that time, at the same time, I always like to give myself grace and understanding because being a leader was something that I had to learn how to do. It wasn't something that I knew everything from the get-go. So that's why over time, I really learned what it means to be a good leader and how to show up as a good leader and what's right and wrong to do as a leader. And so there were many mistakes made in the beginning that just really hurt the business in a lot of ways and caused us a lot of financial challenges that could have been easily avoided. So the next thing I want to talk about actually is about the financial struggle aspect of running a small business, because I think a lot of people don't really like to talk about this because maybe it's taboo or awkward, or they don't feel comfortable talking about finances in that way. But I will be the first to admit that the first couple of years of my business were a complete struggle in terms of managing finances well, making sure that we had consistent cash flow coming into the business. Because the thing is, when you're running a small business, the cash flow is most likely not going to be consistent. And that's for a number of reasons. One, you could lose a contract at any time. Most of my contracts were month to month back then. And because of that, when a client let us go, it created a dent in the overall cash flow and the financial stability of the business. And whenever that happens, it's up to you as the business owner to be able to cover those expenses. And so that put a lot of pressure on my personal finances because I didn't always know how much money was going to be coming into the business because of those month-to-month contracts. And another piece is making sure that you actually have financial stability in the business, making sure that you have savings, making sure that you have enough money to cover your expenses, because if you don't, then you could find yourself in a really bad spot really quickly, which is what happened to me. Because whenever I started my business, I pretty much was just like, I'm going to go for it. I didn't have like 10 or 20K in savings at the time. And so whenever I started my business, I didn't really have too much of a safety net. And that was a mistake because I found myself in some sticky situations whenever the cash didn't come in or clients paid late, which actually happens more often than you would think. Clients don't always pay on time, and so that creates even more stress and pressure on your finances. I'm very fortunate because in general, I've had clients who pay on time, but not every single time. And sometimes it's not even from malicious intent or anything. Sometimes they just forget, they don't see the invoice, they don't see the email. You have to follow up multiple times. That's just part of the job, right? Unless you have someone to manage that for you, which I didn't back then and still don't. I'm still managing all the invoicing for my business. And the reality is that with all of that, just in general, with invoicing, with managing the finances, you have to be incredibly proactive because for most of my business, I was working in a reactive way that wasn't sustainable or really even safe at all. So I've learned that you have to be proactive with that sort of thing in order to make sure that you have enough money to cover expenses if something goes wrong, and that you're really planning for the future of your business as well, like paying taxes quarterly, filing your annual reports, which is something you have to do in Florida every year. So there are certain aspects of the business that you have to do on schedule, and that requires a proactive mindset and being incredibly organized with your finances. So that's the perfect example of the difference between surviving and thriving, is just making sure that you're taking steps in advance to prevent bad things from happening. So next, I want to talk about firefighting, and not in the literal sense, but sometimes it does feel like you're fighting fires whenever emergencies happen. And I say emergencies, quote unquote, because we're not performing brain surgery here. I do marketing. That is not a life or death situation, right? But sometimes whenever clients have issues and they come to you with a real sense of urgency, it can feel like literally your house is burning down. And that's a reality of a service-based business whenever you are providing a service, especially marketing, to a client. So some great examples are, let's say the wrong social media post got published to the wrong client account. That's something that happens to every social media manager, I promise you. It happens to everyone at least once. But that's an example of a fire that you got to put out really quickly because you don't want something about gardening going out on an account that is for like an apparel company. It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't look professional. It's a bad situation. Another example is, let's say an email campaign goes out and there's a call to action button, but the button doesn't have the correct link added. So these little tiny details make a huge difference in the result for the client. And so that's why, you prevent these fires in advance as you gain more experience, which goes back to what I was saying about having a proactive approach to everything. But these things happen, and they happen to me. And so whenever I wasn't being proactive and I was doing everything at the last minute and rushing, hustling, it became very easy for these fires to start and for me to feel like I just constantly was having to survive every day, just waiting for the next bad thing to happen. And that is not sustainable. It will ruin your mental health. And that's why it's important to, again, be proactive and make sure that you're really striving to thrive in your business. Another aspect of being in survival mode, and this is something I actually haven't heard any other creator talk about yet, but whenever you're first starting your business, it's very lonely. You probably have a lot of people who don't believe in you, or they think what you're doing is stupid, or they're against you. And just so you know, I don't wish that on you. I wish for you to have a strong support system who loves you and believes in you and cheers you on every day. But a lot of people don't have that because your friends and family want you to succeed. They don't want to see you fail. And so they sometimes get fearful of what will happen if you take such a big risk as starting a business. And that was my case. I had a lot of people who loved me dearly, who didn't fully support me in my business in the beginning. And I say that with a heavy heart because they really meant well. They wanted to support me. They wanted to cheer me on in whatever I was doing, but just their fear and their worry overcame them so much that they couldn't. And that's something that now, 3 years later, I understand. But at the time, I felt like whenever people would speak negatively about my business or try to belittle it, I would get very defensive in my head because I was thinking, oh, they just don't understand, or they don't care about me, or they don't want me to succeed, which wasn't the case. But that was my short-sighted perspective at the time. And whenever you feel lonely and you feel alone, especially if you're a woman, that can make you feel like you're in survival mode, because especially as women, we love to be in community. We love to support one another. We love to cheer each other on. And by nature, we want to be nurturing and supporting, and to be nurtured and to be supported. So I think, especially in the beginning when I felt very alone, that made me feel like I was more in survival mode. But now that I've connected with more entrepreneurs, I've connected with a lot of like-minded people who have similar goals, I feel like I have a much better support system. I have people I can talk to if I have a business-related problem, and I didn't have that so much before. And that's why working with a business mentor, especially in the beginning, can be very helpful, because they give you that support and that level of understanding that the people in your personal life might not. And another thing a business mentor can help you with is long-term planning, really building your business to be sustainable rather than just having this short-sighted focus. Because when you're in survival mode, you're just thinking, how am I going to get through the week? How am I going to pay my bills? How am I going to feed myself? How am I going to meet my personal needs as well as the needs of the business? How am I going to pay my team this week or this month? But whenever you have the long-term game plan in mind and you're truly thriving and you're able to plan long-term, that sets you up for success, because again, it's all about being proactive. And the thing about survival mode too is you feel like you're on a hamster wheel. You're spinning, but you're not getting anywhere. You're just on the same wheel, not moving forward at all, just getting through the day and the week or the month. And that's a horrible feeling. I hate feeling that way. That's one of my least favorite feelings in the world. But that, my friends, is why you have to take action to go from this survival mode to truly thriving in your business. And we're going to talk about that next. So the first thing is organization is truly key for being proactive. So planning what your goals are. I love to set quarterly goals for my business from a revenue standpoint and any other aspects of the business that are important. Like if I have a new product or service I'm launching or number of new clients I want to get, those are measurable metrics that I can set at the beginning of the month at the beginning of the quarter, and then work backwards and say, okay, what steps do I need to take in order to achieve that within the next 3 months? When you have a set goal and you have the roadmap to get there, there's not so much confusion or doubt about what you should be doing day to day. You have a clear plan and you don't waste time deliberating. You just take action on it, and that will move you forward so much faster than you think. So having a clear plan is key, and also having a growth mindset. So having a fixed mindset means that you don't believe that you can grow or expand, that you're just stuck where you are and people don't ever change or grow or expand. And having a growth mindset means that you believe that you can change and grow and expand by working intentionally towards that. So by constantly educating yourself, by having an open mind, by absorbing information and perspectives. And sometimes this means changing your perspective about things. I have changed my perspective about things many times as I've gotten more information and analyzed it. So I don't want to bring politics into this, but I'm going to use politics as an example because that's a wonderful example I can think of. So in the US, you have Republicans and you have Democrats, right? So a lot of people are the same political party as they were when they were growing up, or not when they were growing up, but they have the same political ideology that their parents did. And these people are often predisposed to have that ideology, and they don't really consider the other side too much. And this is something that I've learned over time. It's very important to consider the other side of politics. And so whenever I am talking to people, because I have friends that are both Republicans and Democrats on all sides of the political spectrum, I feel like I can have a very unbiased and productive conversation with either side about things. And, you know, maybe I shouldn't have used the political example because I don't want to alienate anybody in this case, but I do think that it's important to make sure that you're considering all sides of a situation before making your own decision about things. And by the way, I do have very strong political views. So it's not just like I'm a wishy-washy person who doesn't know what I believe. I have my own beliefs about things and my own perspectives on it, but those were formed after hearing opinions from both sides of the political spectrum. And that's how it should be for everything in life. That's what having a growth mindset is. It's the key to continuous learning and self-improvement. So another key to thriving, as I mentioned, is financial stability. And this is something you plan for. It's part of being proactive. But a lot of people, when they think about financial stability, they think about avoiding debt. But, I feel like there's so much negativity and kind of wounded energy around finances. And part of it is believing that debt is bad, which I have learned to reframe that perspective over the years, because I used to think, I have to stay out of debt. I have to stay out of debt. But the truth is that not all debt is bad. Debt is a tool that you use in order to move forward and to get something. So if you use debt intentionally, then it's not a bad thing. It's just a means to an end. It's something that you use to achieve your goals. And a perfect example is buying a house. You go into debt to buy a house, but then you have a place to live, you have a home, you own that. So not all debt is bad, and anyone who tells you that all debt is bad has a very limited perspective on that topic. One thing I love to do is romanticize financial planning, and that might sound silly at first, but just hear me out. When something is very unsexy or not that fun, what you can do is you can kind of dress it up, make it a little more exciting. So what you can do, and this is what I recommend, is having weekly money dates. So you're literally sitting down and going on a little date with your money, spend an hour or 2 hours, however long you want. And you're going to look at your bank accounts, you're going to look at your debt, you're going to look at any upcoming payments you have, any bills, any, tax payments you need to make. These are all great things to keep tabs on. So because this is a date, one thing that helps make it more fun is you pair it with something you enjoy. So could be a glass of wine, it could be a poppy. I love those poppy sodas. They're my favorite. So I usually drink those instead of alcohol, but you could do that. You could have a snack, eat your favorite meal, just do things that maybe you might do on a date, and just make it a fun activity that you can look forward to. And that'll create a positive energy around money anyway. So if you're constantly in this lack mindset around money, like there's never enough, you're constantly stressed about bills, you feel like you're just not having enough money coming in, then maybe you need to heal your relationship with money. And having little money dates, fun things, is one great way to do that. So I recommend that for all business owners that are looking to get more abundance flowing in. And that way you can stay on top of your finances and take care of all the things that you might have been putting off, like paying your taxes, filing your taxes, keeping track of expenses, logging all that information. These are things that for me personally are just not that fun. So I have to find a way to spice it up a little bit, And speaking of which, I think this has to do with my human design. I'm a generator. So whenever I'm feeling lit the fuck up, I really move forward on projects. And so it's helpful for me to focus on tasks that are really lighting me up, making me have fun, tasks that I enjoy. So that's why having a strong team is very important to me, because I can delegate tasks that I don't enjoy to them. And it's not just to give them all my busy work. It's not like that. It's really to have people working with me who have their own zone of genius, things they enjoy doing, things that they are good at, better at than me. That's the types of tasks that I send to them so they can take care of it and they can be in their zone of genius while I'm in mine. And I have a wonderful team who helps me with a lot of things. Like I mentioned, I have 2 content creators who help me with social media and doing graphics. I have a lovely podcast editor who's wonderful. I have a WordPress developer who helps with all our web projects. I have an SEO expert who helps with content production and SEO strategy. So we have a wonderful team of people who help us. I have a copy editor as well who helps with just refining articles and making sure they're the best they can be. So all of these people work together as one unit to make the dream happen. And that's what I want for you as well. If you're an entrepreneur who's feeling burned out, you have a lot of things on your plate that you just don't want to do or you aren't good at, and you want someone to help you, you need a strong team that you can delegate things to, that you can rely on. And I'll share a few tips on building this team. So first is to make sure that everybody's skills complement one another. So what I mean by this is you don't want to have too much overlap in personalities or skill sets, because you want to make sure that you have people to cover every single area of your business. So for example, if I already have 2 content creators, my next person that I hire is not going to be another content creator, more than likely, unless I really need more support in that area. I would rather hire someone who has a completely different skill set, who can take more off my plate and help me with other things. You want to make sure that people you hire are experts in their areas. So I wouldn't hire a graphic designer to do copywriting work for me. It just doesn't make sense. So going back to what I said about the zone of genius, things work really well when everyone is doing what they're good at. So keep that in mind. And when you have this team, as I mentioned before, it's very important to be a strong leader. So what does this mean exactly? You are responsible as the leader for the entire group. So when something goes wrong, it falls on you, not on them. Because I'll just give you an example. So let's say you're working with a client, and I'll just use the same example as before, where the wrong post got published to the wrong account. So as the leader, you're not going to blame that on your team, even if they're the ones who made the error. It's your responsibility to make sure that everything is done correctly. So you have to take that responsibility as the leader. The blame game does not work, because if you go back to the client and you say, oh, so-and-so just published the wrong post, it's their fault, then that doesn't make you a very good leader, because you're not taking responsibility for the people you have on your team. And part of this requires just an extreme level of maturity. And I was 24 years old when I started my business, so I wasn't very mature back then. I thought that I was, but I actually wasn't, because I didn't really understand the true gravity of what it means to run a business. And so I was off partying and not prioritizing my business, not having set working hours. I wasn't taking care of myself. I wasn't getting enough sleep. I wasn't eating well. I wasn't doing all the things that I needed to do in order to be a good leader for my business. And a lot of those things did have to do with my personal life, in fact, because even though I thought I was being a good leader, I was showing up to work, I was doing the work, I was talking to the clients, I was doing all the things that I thought I was supposed to be doing. But in reality, I wasn't taking enough care of myself, and I wasn't able to give 100% to my business as a result. And here's the thing, whenever you have a business, you have to be 110% all in on that business. You have to be committed to it. And what a lot of business owners struggle with in the beginning is they're not all in, because they don't fully 100% or 110% believe in themselves. So whenever you say you want to run a business, but you're not all the way in the water, you know what I mean? Maybe you're dipping your toes in, but you're not fully diving into it. That's a really limiting energy to have, because then you're not giving all of your effort. You're not devoted to it. And that'll prevent you from achieving your full potential. So it's important that when you make the commitment to start a business, that you are all the way in, baby. Because when I was all the way in, that's when I started to get good results. Okay, so another mistake I want to talk about is not marketing the business enough in the beginning. So most of the clients that I got whenever I first started my business were from Upwork and referrals. They weren't really from our content marketing efforts. And because of that, I didn't have a lot of inbound leads coming in, meaning that I was doing all the work to pitch to clients and get them that way, rather than people finding us and saying, hey, we want to work with you guys. And this is a very dangerous place to be in when you think about it, because if you ever stop the pitching and you stop going out and trying to find clients, then the leads are going to run dry. You're not going to have any more business coming in. And all of that takes a lot of effort. Going out and finding clients to work with you takes effort. Whereas if you have your inbound marketing strategy working, then you have people coming to you saying, I want to work with you. You're the right fit for us. You know what I mean? So that's why from the beginning, I always recommend be consistent with your marketing, have strong branding, have good positioning in the market. And this doesn't mean spending $4,000 on a logo, by the way. It's not about that. It's just about showing up and telling people who you are, what you're about, and how you can help them. So another thing that will help distinguish you and help you thrive as a business is raising your prices. This is important because you can't just charge the same amount for like 10 years. I mean, I guess you could, but that wouldn't really be sustainable to the growth of your company or you as a person, because as we know, inflation is a thing. Things become more expensive every year in the United States. So you have to continue raising your prices to keep up with the economy. In order to charge more, your client has to feel the value of what you're giving them. So this means creating a luxury experience from them at every touch point. So things like having a smooth onboarding process, having a kickoff call, making sure that client feels very supported in the beginning is incredibly important. And that will set the stage for success in the long term with that client relationship. I can't even tell you how long we went without having a client onboarding process. It's not good, but it's important to have that in place because otherwise things are going to be really disorganized. And if you have a team, they're not going to know what the fuck to do with anything because they're going to be like, okay, what's the next step? What's the next step? So that's why you need to have this laid out in advance and execute it to a T. The onboarding is arguably one of the most important parts of the process because once you have them onboarded, everybody knows what they're doing, the client feels comfortable and they're not freaking out, then you're good to go. And you can provide the service as normal. It's also important to have clear communication processes with the client. So what this means is having regular check-ins. Are you sending them a weekly report? Are you sending them a daily email? Like, what is it that you are going to do to effectively communicate with them? And just make sure that they know what that schedule is going to be and you stick to it. Because if they're expecting an email from you at the end of the week, then you deliver on that and everything is good. They feel like everything's on track. And that's really the feeling you want to create for the client. And that whole onboarding and client communication workflow is something that I could have done a lot better from the beginning because some of the clients I did have weekly calls with, and I still do to this day. But beyond that, sometimes whenever you don't communicate enough with a client, then they just kind of feel neglected or they start to worry that things are going wrong. And even if everything's okay, if the client feels like it's not, that's going to be a problem for you. So highly recommend planning all that out in advance. So next, I want to talk about work-life balance and just overall productivity. These are fundamental to your ability to thrive in your business. So one thing I do is I use my Apple Calendar. I sync all of my calendars to that because I have multiple calendars for different projects, right? Everything's synced to my Apple Calendar. That's my source of truth. But then I block out time for my meetings, of course. Key tasks like recording this podcast, I have blocked on my calendar. Also, my self-care time and my workouts, I block out on my calendar. So then if it's on the calendar, it's happening. It's a non-negotiable. That's how it's going to go. And that's really the way that I'm able to make sure that I'm hitting all of the important priorities in my life and taking care of those tasks first before all the little other things are sprinkled in. And then within each activity, I have routines that I follow. So for podcast recording, I have to factor in time to set up the equipment. I have to make sure my camera's charged. Like there's processes there that need to be followed. And I have those same types of processes, for example, with my self-care routine. So I wake up in the morning, I do certain things, whether it's meditation or journaling or connecting with God. These are things that are part of the routine and I do them and make sure I have that time blocked out for those things. Even before I get started with my workday, I still have that structure in place for my personal life. Ever since I started prioritizing my morning and evening routines, my life has done a 180. I don't feel as stressed out anymore. I feel like my personal needs are actually being fulfilled. I don't feel burned out. I feel well rested. These are all very important things. As far as organizing my personal life, I use Notion to make to-do lists, setting appointments, and overall just planning my self-care routines, logging different recipes I see online I want to try, things like that I keep track of there, shopping lists as well. But then for my business, I actually use ClickUp because I think ClickUp is a lot better for planning tasks with teams and staying organized that way. So I use two different tools, but I love both of them equally. They both serve their purpose, and that's how I do that. So if you want more Notion or ClickUp tips, let me know because I would love to talk more about these topics. I'm kind of a nerd for project management and productivity stuff, so I would love to talk more about that. Okay, so I will leave you with a few actual tips on how you can truly thrive in your business instead of just surviving, okay? So we'll recap what we discussed. The first thing I would suggest is being proactive with your financial planning and really making it fun. Like, get in a groove with it, have your money dates, make it fun and exciting to make money. It shouldn't be something that's stressful. It doesn't have to be. So make it fun. And definitely, I recommend getting some kind of project management tool. Some people do like paper planners, but that's just not for me. So as I mentioned, ClickUp and Notion are my go-to. And finally, just remember to be fully committed to your business. This is something just like a relationship that requires sacrifice, it requires patience and understanding, and it requires a full commitment from you. So keep that in mind. All right, well, that concludes today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. And actually, if you have any questions about what we discussed or really any business questions in general, please DM me on Instagram. My Instagram is at Samantha Lee Warren, and I will leave it in the show notes so you can go follow me, DM me, ask me any questions you have. I would love to chat with you. And if you love this episode and you found it valuable, then share it to your Instagram story. Let me know what your favorite part was or what your favorite little nugget of wisdom was that you enjoyed. So feel free to share with your friends and family or anyone who you think would benefit from this episode. All right, well, that's it for today. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.